I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and get ready to let Lee J share his screen, because sitting right next to him is our presenter. So PJ Murray has been a long time member of Mountaineer Audubon. Lee J informed me that he even was a past president, and he revived the Christmas bird count. So that was a good action. PJ is a native of South Africa, and he still has friends and family there. So he is currently a retired physician, and he lifelong birder. Wherever he goes, he takes his birding with him. PJ enjoys gardening and varying the landscape around his house. He's a family man. He and his wife stay close with their daughters and granddaughters. So here we go. We'll turn the screen over to you guys. Okay, thanks.
PJ Murray and sorry.
Okay, you're good. You're unmuted.
Can you hear us?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. I'm a native of Cape Town in South Africa, and fell in love with the local flora, well, local animal life initially, then the bird life, and subsequently the flora. And I made a brief presentation to the local chapter of the Master Naturalist program a couple of months ago. And this effort is the same program with a few extra pictures of birds and beasts grafted onto the end of it. So we'll go right ahead. The initial picture, if you can see it, shows a southern common bee eater. We can get back to one a little later. The next slide is in the background is Kirstenbosch Gardens, which we will also visit again. And in the background of that is part of Table Mountain, and then in the far distance, Devil's Peak. Okay.
You want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take this.
Here's four.
I can't see the icon. So we'll say a little bit about the topography of the country, a little bit about the climate, and the vegetation. I can't get this thing to move. There we go. So, all right, we'll go on to the next slide.
Go there again.
Okay. And in this one, you can see perhaps that there is a basic chain of mountains along the east side of the country. Oh, shucks. And wrong one. And a coastal plain here. Now, most of South Africa is extremely dry. It is not a country of forests and woods. It is mostly semi-desert. And up here you see Kalahari Desert. Up here is the Namibia, and along the coast is the Namib Desert. And sorry, I'm having a little bit of a problem here. And I'm going to speak a little bit extra about this area down in the southwestern Cape, right in the bottom left-hand area of the screen, and the Cape Peninsula in particular, where I was born and raised, and even more about Table Mountain, which is on the Cape itself. Now, as you in this area is a unique floral kingdom, so we're going to say a little bit about that. Sure. Sorry about this bouncing around. Still can't get it right. Here we go. As you go up the east coast of South Africa, it gets progressively warmer. Down here, this is a Mediterranean climate, similar to the Mediterranean area, and also perhaps California, San Francisco, etc. As you go further east and north, it becomes wetter, the rainfall increases until you get up here, which is subtropical. So down here are farmlands with wheat and sheep farming. This is semi-desert, basically, like similar in many ways to Arizona and New Mexico. And then along the coast here, we have pineapples grown in this sort of area. Up here, you have your mangoes, avocados, and papayas and so on, sugarcane fields. And we're going to visit a couple of game reserves, perhaps one or two things down here in the Cape. We're going to look at some shots from game reserves in Natal, and then some from the Kruger Park, which is an extremely large park along the eastern border of South Africa, bordering with Mozambique, which is about the size of Israel or Massachusetts. And it has lots of private game reserves along its western edge, which contribute to the area for migration of animals. Also, the adjacent area in Mozambique is a national park. However, it is not very well protected, and there is a lot of poaching and destruction of game across into Mozambique. We're also going to visit a little area west of Johannesburg. A couple of shots that I took there was in Pilanesberg, and I'm cheating. There are some pictures that weren't taken in South Africa at all. Some of them were taken in Namibia. Up here is the Etosha Game Reserve, a wonderful place to visit and extremely dry. Okay, well, let's go to the next. Okay. Now, we're going to say a little bit about floristic kingdoms. In the northern hemisphere, the entire northern hemisphere, basically north of the equator, is in the Holarctic region, which has basically one flora. South and Central America, almost entirely in the Neotropic region. The Paleotropics include most of Africa and Asia. Then there's, of course, there's the Antarctic and Australia. And then the last one is the Cape Floral Kingdom. It is unique because it is firstly the smallest. It's extremely small. It is limited largely to a type of flora called fynbos, which we'll say a little bit more about. And this is a map of the vegetation in South Africa. Now, this orange, which stands out pretty well, is called semi-desert, and north of it is called steppe. Well, I would call all that area also semi-desert or desert. If you look at this map, you see tiny little spots of dark green. Those are little relict areas of indigenous forest. That's about all the natural woodland that we have in South Africa. Very limited, sadly threatened, being cut down to make place for more people and squatters and so on. And it's very, very precious. In this area of the Cape, there are 50 indigenous trees. As we go up the coast to the warmer, wetter area, the number of indigenous trees increases to 200 to 300. This area here is as I've said, unique, but it has a fairly limited number of animal species. In the fynbos area, which we will visit, this word here, fynbos, there are some 200 species which are to be found, many more outside the fynbos area along the coast and so on, and lots of pelagic birds. Now, the pictures that I have, I took all of them myself except for the maps and this aerial view of the Cape Peninsula. This shows the city center of Cape Town in the arms of the Table Mountain massif. This mountain on the left is Devil's Peak. Table Mountain itself is the flat top part here, extending down to the south, right to the very point of the peninsula, which is Cape Point. And here we have another peak called Lion's Head, and this is the Lion's Rump ending in Signal Hill. As you can see, the city is surrounded by the mountain, but the mountain is also surrounded by the city. And I was born and raised on the other side of the mountain in the southern suburbs. This area here is called the Cape Flats. And in relatively recent geological times, it was under the ocean. It is basically just sand. And in years past, a foreign vegetation, namely the Port Jackson willow, was imported from Western Australia to stabilize the sand, and it's become an invasive species. Anyway, Table Mountain is within the Cape Floral Kingdom, and we will talk about the biodiversity of it. Table Mountain itself has over 2,000 species of plants on Table Mountain, which is greater than all the entire number of species of plants in the entire British Isles. So it's a very small area, but even this area, right in the middle of the built-up peninsula, is still rich in biodiversity. Next picture. Now, the fynbos has about 9,000 plant species, of which 6,000 are endemic and not found anywhere else in the world. So per unit area, it's the smallest and richest biome in the world. In this area are numerous proteas. There are few proteas in Australia, but otherwise they're almost entirely limited to this area. Many ericas, restios or reeds and similar plants, and lots of bulbous herbs, as well as orchids, asters, lilies, and irises, and things like that. The ericas in particular, we have approximately 29 species in the Ericaceae family in West Virginia. The two best known are the great laurel, which is of course the rhododendron, and the mountain laurel. The fynbos has 600 species of erica. These are heaths. The most famous one in Britain, of course, is the heather of Scotland. Ericas vary in color from red to purple to pink to white to yellow, and all kinds of different shapes. The fynbos got its name from the Dutch settlers who first arrived here, hoping to find trees which they could use, or timber that they could use for boat building and construction, and they were very disappointed. So they called the local flora fynbos, which literally means fine bush, and there are very few trees available in South Africa. Most of the timber is exotic, American pines, English oaks, and wattles, and eucalypts from Australia. Now, the last picture we had of the Cape Peninsula was looking towards Cape Point. Now we're looking towards Cape Town from the other side of Table Bay. You can again see the flat top of Table Mountain with Lion's Head here, and over here is Devil's Peak. It is a flat top mountain because it was sheared off by an ice sheet during the Ice Age about 500 million years ago. It is an old mountain. Our mountains here in West Virginia are in the order of 300 million years old. So this is pretty old. It is a sandstone mountain with a high content of quartz, so it's fairly resistant to erosion. And it basically is, what's I going to say? It's a syncline mountain. It was initially at the bottom of a valley, and it remained because it was of its durability, and the surrounding anticline mountains, which were much higher, have all eroded away. And that is why it is elevated above the surrounding countryside today. Now, this is a view, that last picture was taken from Robben Island looking towards Table Mountain. We are now up on Table Mountain looking towards Robben Island. That is where Nelson Mandela was confined for 27 years. That's another story which would take a whole hour just to describe. Here again, we can see Lion's Rub, Lion's Head, and oops. And you may be able to see the cable of the cable car or tramway which goes up to Table Mountain. This is a little piece of fynbos that you can see here. And I better not talk too much about the plants because you want to see a few bird pictures. This is an example of fynbos on Table Mountain near the cable station. I'm honestly not sure what this yellow plant is. This orange, this pinky purple one is a pelargonium. The pelargoniums in South Africa are the ancestors of all the geraniums that you can buy in any nursery in the US or around the world today. And that's a closer shot of one of the pelargoniums. Now we're going to travel around the Cape Peninsula and end up at Cape Point. There are just a couple of slides. This is a fishing harbor called Hout Bay on the peninsula, and it's called Hout is the Dutch, or Hout is the Dutch word for wood, because they did find a little bit of timber here, and that's how it derived its name. Next picture is a sea lion with a bit of fish in its mouth in the harbor at Hout Bay. And this is Cape Point itself. If you go straight south from here, you'll hit the Antarctic continent and the South Pole. The inset shows two heartthrob gulls, which are an endemic species found on the west coast of southern Africa down to the southern tip and nowhere else. Now this is the African penguin colony at Boulders, which is a very popular tourist site. It's now part of the Table Mountain National Monument and a national park. Table Mountain is also the most frequented or most visited tourist site in South Africa. The African penguin was initially called the jackass penguin, but they wrote to the authorities and said it was a pejorative name and they wanted to change to the African indigenous penguin. Were called jackass penguins because the noise they make is like the braying of a donkey. This is a close-up of an adult, which is black and white plumage. Of course, the youngsters are grey, and it has this little pink area on the head. If you go and see the penguin colony, you will also come across the rock hyrax, which is related, believe it or not, to the elephant developmentally, and they are vegetarians that live in and amongst the rocks. There are several species of hyrax occurring elsewhere. There's also a tree hyrax, and the word hyrax, or the hyrax, is thought to be the coney of the Bible. Now we are back at Kirstenbosch Gardens, where we had the background picture at the beginning of the slideshow. These are some examples of the indigenous bush there with a bit of Table Mountain in the background. And it is a World Heritage Site. It's a beautiful place. And particularly if you visit on a weekday or before the crowds arrive, you can see a fair number of local bird species there, including things like Cape Francolin and guinea fowl. And there are slides of a couple of others. Here's one of the ericas. This is one of the endemic species that occur in the fynbos. That is an orange-breasted sunbird, and that picture was taken in Kirstenbosch Gardens. I must apologize for the quality of the pictures. They're not terribly good. I used to fancy myself as a photographer, but I have an old beat-up bottom of the line Canon EOS with a 100 to 300 millimeter zoom lens, which is not really optimal for bird photography. And that's what was used for most of these pictures. So anyway, we'll just have to make the best of it. Sunbirds are limited to Africa. Oops, we've gone the wrong way here. No, we are going backwards.
Here we go. Just
Okay.
just click on.
Okay, these are a couple of examples of other plants that occur in the fynbos area. The one on the left of my meaties, which it tends to occur at higher altitudes, and a typical erica here with very bright red flowers. Now, this is another species which is endemic to the Cape fynbos, the Cape sugarbird, along with the sunbirds. It feeds on nectar, and this bird, as you can see, has extruded its tongue, and so that it can put its tongue out pretty deep into a protea. Not a very bright bird, but it is. There's only one other species of sugarbird, which occurs a little further north, Gurney's sugarbird, and that has a kind of reddish area on the nape area. This picture was also taken in Kirstenbosch Gardens, African wood owl, which is fairly widespread in Africa. And this is a southern double-collared sunbird, another example, sitting on an erica of a different color, also taken in Kirstenbosch Gardens. So it is a place that is worth visiting for birding as well as the plants. A couple of other examples of proteas, the king protea or Protea cyranoides on the left, and one of the leucospermums on the right, which also belongs to the protea family. Now we're going to leave Cape area and go further north. This bird was actually photographed in the Transvaal. It is a spotted thick-knee. The tibio-tarsal joint, or what we would think of as the knee joint, is thickened. It used to be called a dikkel or thick head, and now it's called a thick knee. There are two species in South Africa, the spotted thick knee, which is a dry land, basically a dry land water bird, and then the water thick knee, which occurs associated with rivers, streams, dams, ponds, and lakes. Now we've gone further north to the Kruger National Park, which is a wonderful place for bird watching. One of the best areas to see birds is in the rest camps, where they always have a source of water, and the birds tend to congregate. These huge billed birds, one would think of as probably fruit eaters, but they're not. They're largely insect eaters, and it is common to see them foraging in piles of elephant dung for insects and beetles and other insects that are using the dung to either feed on or to make into their, or to use for their young. A few animal shots thrown in here. These are Cape buffalo with a calf, a cow, and a large mean-looking bull. An animal that is not to be trifled with, especially if you're a hunter and you've wounded one. You want to be very careful, because they in turn will hunt down a hunter who has injured them. Southern Africa is pretty rich in reptiles, lots of snakes and chameleons, lizards and tortoises and so on. And this is an example of an angulated tortoise. This picture was actually taken in Natal. This is an African chameleon seen crossing the road, also in Natal. They're fairly widespread, and I used to play with them as a child in our garden in Cape Town. This is a young bull elephant in Kruger Park, showing off his displeasure at the closeness of the tourists. He's doing a mock charge and just being a teenager. He's not really, doesn't mean really serious business in doing us harm. Now this picture shows the two kinds of rhino found in South Africa. The white rhino on the right is better known as the square-lipped rhino, and you can see it is basically has a flat jaw line, and it is a grazer eating grass. It is fairly mild-mannered, and when there's a large herd of them, you can pretty much get very close and they will just stand and look at you. Now, the black rhino is a very different creature. It is smaller, but has a fairly foul temperament and charges at the least provocation or even just annoyance. And it's also known as the sharp-lipped rhinoceros. It has a pointed lip, and it is a browser. It eats brush, so they do not compete for grazing. Years ago, white rhino were almost completely extinct in South Africa. They were very carefully protected in KwaZulu, in the Hluhluwe-Umfolozi Reserve Complex, and they multiplied. Many were captured and transported to other areas in Africa, so that they are now fairly widespread. And in turn, the black rhino, which was at one stage fairly common, is now in serious decline and relatively rare, much less rarely seen now than the white rhino. Both of them, of course, are hunted for their horns, where international syndicates come in helicopters, shoot the rhino with an automatic rifle, saw off the horn with a chainsaw, and the whole procedure is over in 5 minutes. The rhino is dead and the horn is on its way to China. This is not a very good picture of vultures, but it does show that there is a significant variety. These here, I believe, are both white-headed vultures. Now, the reason this one doesn't have a white head is because it's juvenile. They have a pinkish bill. This one with the bare head is a lappet-faced vulture, and this one has a typical griffin shape. So it's either a white-backed vulture or a Cape vulture. They're quite difficult to tell apart. They have somewhat different coloration on the neck. The best way to tell when soaring is they have a different underwing pattern, but this, I believe, is a white-backed vulture, and the Cape vulture would not be nearly as common in Kruger Park. These are pretty rare and, in fact, endangered. And all vultures around the world are under, as Katie Fallon will tell you, are under extremely severe threats because peasant farmers and poachers alike poison them or poison carcasses and deliberately poison these birds, which is really tragic because they play an extremely useful role in nature. Back to our common bee-eater, they are an endemic species in southern Africa and nest in banks and big flocks. Very dramatic to see a large number of them, and they actually do eat flying insects. These are two of the lapwings. Years ago, they were known as plovers. The one on the left is the crowned plover, known in Afrikaans as the kibbit, because that is similar to the noise it makes. The one on the right is near threatened. It is it's an uncommon bird, and this is the white, the one on the left is the crowned vulture, and this is the white crowned vulture. It used to be called the white crowned lapwing. Used to be called the wattled plover. So that was a nice find. And this one on the right was photographed in the Kruger Park. The one on the left is a dryland bird. The one on the right associated with water. This is a picture of a pied barbet. As you can see, it's got a pretty massive. Incorrect. It's a picture of a crested barbet. I don't know if you can see the crest. It's folded down. It has a massive bill but it is largely a frugivorous bird, although it will eat insects and so on. And it's common in savanna woodland. This was also shot in the Kruger Park. This is the woodland kingfisher associated with dry woodlands. Doesn't have to be anywhere near water, and it eats largely insects. There are 7 or 8 different species of kingfisher in South Africa. The largest is the giant kingfisher, the smallest the malachite kingfisher, and the most common one is the pied kingfisher. This is a kitty cat that was photographed in the Palanesburg National Park in the Transvaal. It had actually come out, it obviously come out at night and was sitting on a road marker, licking water off the tiles. It had just rained. Anyway, it was kind enough to stay stationary for a picture session. These pictures also come from Palanesburg. There's only one species of giraffe found in South Africa, and they vary greatly in coloration. The bulls tend to be darker in color, but they vary also from location to location. Some are pale and some are dark. There's a darker one, and this one was photographed in Etosha in Namibia. My wife insisted that I put a picture of a giraffe drinking because this is a position in which they're extremely vulnerable, and they always look around very carefully before drinking to make sure no lions are nearby, because it takes them a while to lift their head up and get going if they're charged by a predator. This is the winner of a beauty contest, also at Palanesburg National Park. That's actually a female warthog. The males have even bigger tusks. Vervet monkeys, fairly widespread in wooded areas. Around towns and in parks, they have become a pest. In Etala Natal Park, where this was taken, these animals will grab your food off the kitchen table as you're carrying it from your car into your chalet if you're staying there. So you can't leave the door open literally for a split second. They will be in and out within a few seconds and cart off a packet of cookies or a bunch of bananas with no problem whatsoever. This is the second largest antelope found in southern Africa, the kudu. These are fairly nice specimens in an area which was recently burned and has now sprouted nice fresh grazing for them. The largest antelope, of course, is the eland. They have these long curved horns, and when they dash into areas where there are trees and brush, they put their heads back so that their horns are aligned along the back and they don't get caught on overhead branches. Another picture taken in the Etala Natal Park is of a violet-backed starling. It looks very different to the starling that we see in this part of the world, and is quite a spectacular bird. Fruit eater. This is a southern masked weaver. It is a masked weaver and not a lesser masked weaver because it has a reddish iris. Very common bird. I've got a picture a bit later on, I believe, of one on a male weaver. This is a male at the nest. This is the grey go-away bird. It used to be called the grey lory. It is a member of the Turaco family. It's called the go-away bird in English and the kweefoel in Afrikaans because the noise it makes is kwee. which sounds like either queer or go away, whichever language you speak. Anyway, they have become more habituated to human habitations and tend to be found in gardens now. They used to be something you only saw out in the wilds. Another bird which has adjusted to suburbanization is the red-winged starling. They used to be very shy, frequently found up on mountain crags, but now they're much more invasive into urban areas. Not altogether a bad thing, because they have displaced to a large extent the European starling, which is a horrible pest bird now widely distributed in many parts of the world. This bird is also frugivorous and makes a mess of your fig trees or whatever. And one of them took my grandson's sandwich when we were having lunch on an outdoor restaurant at Cape Point. These are lesser striped swallows. There are quite a few species of swallows in South Africa, some migratory within Africa and some migrating from Europe. This one is migratory within Africa. The greater striped swallow is a significantly larger bird, and the breast is not nearly as heavily streaked as this particular species. This is a spur duck, a spur-winged goose. There are 3 birds named goose in South Africa. The spur-winged goose, which is fairly common. The Egyptian goose, which has also increased its range markedly, used to be found mostly in subtropical regions, has now spread right down to Cape Town. It is also a nuisance bird in parts of Europe now, and I believe in Florida. That's the Egyptian goose. Anyway, this is a much larger bird and not as common or as widely distributed as the Egyptian goose. The third goose is the pygmy goose, which is actually a duck. This is a white-fronted bee-eater. There are about 7 species of bee-eater in southern Africa, and this one really does like to eat honeybees. It is an endemic species and fairly common. Yes, fairly common. These are ground hornbills, which are near threatened. They used to be fairly common. Now there are not very many of them. It is a very large bird, and they will eat almost anything that they can get hold of, including reputedly things like squirrels and hares, also snakes, lizards, and so on, and any other critter they can capture. Seeing them fly is quite a sight. It's like a large bomber taking off, and their call is a really deep booming noise. This is a yellow-billed hornbill, also common in the Kruger National Park. Similar to the red-billed hornbill, tends to forage mostly for insects. This is a lilac-breasted roller, which is quite a spectacular bird, particularly when flying. They have brilliant underwing colors. They hawk insects from a perch, and they're very active. They don't stay sitting for long. It's quite difficult to get a good picture of one for that reason. But they are fairly common residents, so they're quite plentiful in Kruger National Park. There are other rollers there too, the broad-billed roller and the purple roller, which are not nearly as common. This is part of the janitorial service in Africa, dung beetle, which provides a very useful service in removing dung for its young to feast on as they grow from larva and then to pupa. This is a not very well focused picture of a golden-breasted bunting, but it is a pretty bird and found in very dry areas. Nice head pattern and a very bright breast color. Another picture taken in Etosha, not in South Africa itself, of a family group of ostriches. The male, of course, takes the night shift, tends to look after the nest where several females will lay their eggs. He protects, stays on the nest overnight. The females usually cover the eggs during the day, as much to keep them cool as to keep them warm. A male in breeding plumage has a pink bill or red bill and pink shins on the tarsus. What else can we say about him? Oh yes, the male takes very good care of the young as well, and they are very protective. And of course, because of their incredibly powerful kick, even lions respect their power. How are we doing for time? Pretty good. This is a red-billed francolin. As you were, they used to be called francolin. They're now called spur fowl. Francolins don't have a spur on the tarsus. This one does. It has spurs. It also has a yellow. It's the only francolin with a yellow eye-ring and a red bill. This is not a very much of a close-up, but it shows a waterhole in Natasha with a fair number of red-billed teal, which are widespread. There are also a couple of cattle egrets there and some collared doves. A couple of doves flying over the waterhole as well. Waterholes are, of course, excellent places to see birds. This is the largest bustard in southern Africa, the Kori bustard. One of the largest flying birds in the world, perhaps the largest. They weigh up to about 25 pounds. Whoops. This is a Namakwa sand grouse, and this is the back plumage of a female. The males carry water from water holes in their breast feathers to the nest, which may be many miles, 20 miles away, and the chicks suck the water out of the feathers that the males bring to the nests. They come down to the water holes in the evening to drink. They're also there in the morning, of course. And the Afrikaans name for this bird is kelkie vein, and they make a beautiful melodious call. And you hear hundreds of them calling at a waterhole. It's a beautiful sound. And it's really wonderful to see them just at dusk coming and going in their hundreds sometimes. This is a fairly rare bird, an uncommon bird, a bare-faced babbler. The babblers are a group of insectivorous birds that live in family groups. Probably the commonest one is the arrow-marked babbler. There is a pied babbler. And this one occurs in very arid country, also in a family groups, usually of 4 to 6 birds, and they make constant contact calls between themselves, amongst themselves. This is a not an Namakwa sandgrouse, a double-banded sandgrouse. Unfortunately, we can't see the double band on its. This is a male. The female is the plumage is much duller, but apart from the bands on the breast, it is remarkable for the color of the bill and the striping on the head. No other sandgrouse has that kind of marking. So this is a double-banded sandgrouse, not quite as common as the Namakwa sandgrouse, but not rare. Just another male ostrich. We've already seen one of those. This is a pied crow, and looking at that bill, I would want to think a raven, but it is a crow. And the raven that we have in South Africa is the white-necked raven, which has a much more pronounced bill. It's fairly common bird. There's also a black crow. This is actually South Africa's national bird. The blue crane, a very, very elegant bird, now unfortunately it's becoming quite rare. It is, I guess, losing habitat to agriculture and other pressures, and so now they're not nearly as common. We used to see them along the roadside often, but now we're not nearly as lucky. This is a Namakwa dove. There are many species of dove in southern Africa, and this is a male. Only the male has the black mask, which extends down onto the breast, and then the white belly. Long, long, long tail. Very much a dry land bird. As you can see, it's sitting on acacia branches with pretty vicious thorns. This is a masked weaver again, flying away from a nest. Nests built by the male. This is reputedly the only bird that can tie knots. And the male constructs a nest. The female inspects it. If she likes it, they mate and produce young. The entry to the nest is underneath, make it more difficult for arboreal snakes to enter, although they do predate on these things. They're amazingly waterproof, and they will stay in trees sometimes for years after they've been constructed. Some of them have some species of weaver make quite long entrance tubes or tunnels, but not this one. If the female doesn't like the nest, it will be abandoned. The male will make another nest and try to attract another female. There's one just finishing off his work. He's got a piece of grass in his claws, in his foot, and he's still working on it. This is a red-eyed bulbul, a frugivorous bird. It's also taken in Namibia. There's a white-eyed bulbul, and a Cape bulbul, and somber green bull, a whole lot of bulbuls. They are frugivorous. This looks like a palm fruit, and he's got a bit of food stuck there, so he was probably just busy eating when I took that picture. This is an African cuckoo, which actually looks very similar to the European cuckoo, which is a migrant. This is an intra-African migrant. It does move further north in Africa during the winter, but it doesn't go as far north as Europe. It's the only one that has yellow like that around the eye, and the bill is basically what allows you to tell it from a European cuckoo. Now this is a Namakwa sandgrouse male, and although he's got a double band, this is not a double-banded sandgrouse, it's a Namakwa sandgrouse. The other picture we had was of a female from the back, so the front of the plumage on the front is completely different. This is a black korhaan. They're divided into northern black korhaan and southern black korhaan. Very difficult to tell. Perhaps the northern has a little bit more white on the head, and it's meant to have a subterminal bit of white on the bill. And I think there is something there, so I have to say this is a northern black korhaan, also taken in Namibia, and quite a striking pattern on the back. There are numerous korhaans and bustards in South Africa. African hoopoe. It used to be called Epupa epops, and I think it's now Epupa africana. But anyway, it's the same bird, it's only changed its name. This is a European roller, not nearly as spectacular as the lilac-breasted roller, but much easier to photograph. They tend to be more sedentary. They're not as aerobatic, and they stay put, allowing for much easier photography. This is red-breasted swallow. There are numerous species of swallow in South Africa. The red extends right from the back onto the chest and belly, and a very long tail, and wings. Another picture of a European roller from the anterior aspect. Another lilac-breasted roller. And the last shot, I think, is of a double-collared sunbird. And that's all we have for you. Does anybody have any questions? Complaints? Comments?
Questions. Donald Ford asked, what's the name of the yellow weaver bird?
That is
Donald Ford asked, what is the name of a yellow weaver bird?
the weaver bird. The weaver is the masked weaver. There is a lesser masked weaver as well, which has a pale iris, yellowish or whitish iris. The plain masked weaver, the one we saw, just masked weaver, not the lesser masked weaver, has a reddish iris, and so that we were looking at the masked weaver. There are numerous other weavers. There's a yellow weaver, there's a village weaver, there's a red-headed weaver, there's a golden weaver. It goes on and on. So, and then of course there are things like the sociable weavers, which build huge, enormous communal nests. There are buffalo weavers, which also nest communally. So there are large numbers of grassland birds belonging to the weaver family. These weavers, the masked weavers almost always nest with their nests overhanging water. So that makes it doubly difficult for many predators to get to them. Not only do the males suspend the nests right at the end of a branch, but over water, it's really tough for snakes and things to get at them. Any other questions? What's that?
Doesn't look like there's any
No.
more questions. Nobody's raising hands.
All right, that's all we have. And so we will wish you good night. And thank you for listening if you managed to sit through it.
Well, PJ, this is Jane. Thank you very much. That was really amazing. And it's also intriguing were the flowers and really just how different it is from here. So I think that people really enjoyed it quite a bit. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, as someone who came from a dry country with little in the way of woods, when I first flew over this part of North America, I was absolutely astounded at the mile after mile of forest that we have. What an enormous national asset it is. And of course, it's been used by people in this country from the pioneer days, you know, for construction and everything else. But it's only when you don't have it that you realize how precious wood is. And there are very few hardwood trees in South Africa, only really two, and they were almost exterminated within 200 years of European settlement in South Africa. They were all cut down for use in construction and in furniture, and they take 200 to 300 years to mature. So we depend entirely on exotic trees for timber in South Africa. Yeah, some furniture we have in our house here in Morgantown is made with South African yellowwood and stinkwood, which are those two famous hardwoods. But the sides of the furniture are made with American basswood, because American woods was imported to South Africa even as early as the 1700s.
I think it's interesting you say that, because we, I don't know, when we look at this program you just gave and all the wonderful birds and how different it is, sometimes we should look at our own neighborhood and see how precious that is too. So,
well, of course it is. Absolutely. It's very different, but just as precious.
yeah.
I love birding in South Africa because I'm old and miserable. My eyesight isn't that great. My hearing is terrible. And African birds in general are much easier to see. You know, the countryside is more open. They're not hiding in woods or deep forests like we have in South America. And so they really are a lot easier to see in most places. And if you know, around water in a dry area, that's where you're going to see birds. So, you know, it's quite easy.